Hello and welcome to a managerial special from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm Craig Savage and next to me is Mr. Daniel Cody. Today we are talking about the sacking of Chris Hughton at Nottingham Forest. He's run the championship this season and has been abysmal. 6 defeats in 7, currently bottom of the table with only a point. We did call this in our predictions. Are you surprised?
Oh, definitely not surprised. I think a bit like you, maybe slightly at the timing. I think you alluded to it, I think, for last weekend's predictions, that doing it in the middle of a run of a 3-game week is possibly a problem, whereas it could have been done maybe in the international break. And they did it after 4 games last year, so I wouldn't have been surprised at that. I'm sure we'll get onto some of the reasons for it and some of the statistics that have led to this, which mean it probably isn't a surprise in fairness, but even based on Nottingham Forest's reputation, a manager doing slightly better, it probably wouldn't have been a surprise at this point.
So his record at Nottingham Forest, 14 wins after 53 games. Considering Chris Hughton's record in the championship with previous clubs has been excellent, what do you think went wrong?
I think a lot of it came down to toothlessness, really. I mean, I've got the stats from his games. In the league, they only had 7 games where they scored 2 goals or more. They had 2 games where they scored 3 goals or more, which were against Millwall in the middle of a poor run and Wycombe, who obviously went down. They're 13 without a win at the moment, and they've not scored more than 1 in any of those games. It's clear that the problem was in front of goal. And I think, to be fair, we say Chris Hughton, you mentioned he's got an excellent championship record. I don't think it's just the manager that's the problem here. We saw at the end of the Lamucci spell, it just dropped off a cliff, the form, obviously with that end of the season missing out on the playoffs. But there was sort of this fallacy that they played big, exciting, attacking football that season, and they really didn't. In that season where they just missed out on the playoffs in 7th, you have to bear with me while I look at the notes here. They scored 58 goals in the championship, which was the second lowest in the top 16. So they were the 15th highest goal scorers when they finished 7th. And everyone talked about the brilliant football they played under Lamucci, but they weren't goals galore. They relied on their defensive record still. So it is a team that isn't, despite some of the names, full of attacking talent that's going to be flamboyant and score lots of goals. Lewis Grabban that season scored 20, but he just turned to the wrong side of 30. He's lost that little yard of pace. Chris Hughton likes to play with a bit more of a focal point. We saw he brought in Glenn Murray at one stage. And Grabban used to play on the shoulder. He's not quite as confident with his back to goal, certainly not quite as effective. One of the things that's also missing from that season, Craig, is lots of the assists were provided by Matty Cash at right back, who was then sold for big money to Aston Villa. Ben Watson set piece delivery, then went on a free in the summer. Sammy Omiobi's form went. Joe Lolly, the second top scorer, then half of his goals were gone as well, just from the players who had left for assists. I think it's a big problem in front of goal. I don't think it's anything one manager can solve. It's a squad that is aging going forwards, that needs a little bit of support. We saw the introduction of Brennan Johnson, who's been a really good addition to the team, but it's going to be a big rebuild here. So I don't think Chris Hughton's just to blame, but I can understand with the frustration with the style of play. 2 holding midfielders, not a huge amount of ambition, but it's worked at every other club and it worked for Lamucci. So I don't think that's entirely the problem.
So are you trying to say that obviously playing staff obviously got to take a little bit of his blame, but the owner's record in the last 10 years hasn't been great either?
No. And let's be fair, that boils down to a number of reasons. Recruitment, they're running at a massive profit in the transfer window, selling their best players and not investing the same amount of money. The manager record's appalling. I mean, you can name any stat over the last 17 years and it's poor. So you've got with caretakers, 27 managers in 17 years. They're looking for their 8th permanent manager in just over 4 years under current ownership. It's silly, really. The instability at the club is crazy. I mean, even Lamucci sacking, it was 4 games after what I know was the disappointing finish, but a pretty good season. And he only got 4 games then. And we're here, fast forwarding just over a year later, and they're in no better position. That suggests that it's not a managerial problem. You've got multiple managers that have been at this club in the last decade that have either been promoted from the championship, in Hughton's case multiple times, have managed international teams in major tournaments, have won League One, have won promotion from other leagues. It's just a very bizarre situation. I feel a lot of the issues are behind the scenes. And I know there has been a lot of directed anger at the board, but I don't think all of the blame can be attributed to the manager because they can't all be bad managers.
No. And you look at the previous managers they had. Martin O'Neill obviously took Ireland to the Euros. Chris Hughton's obviously won the championship with Newcastle, took Brighton up. Steven Reid's done well abroad in France. So it just seems that they've been forced their hand to do stuff that maybe the owners want to do. And then it feels an effect on their fans. Fans obviously pressure. Obviously, Nottingham Forest, big club, obviously European champions from yesteryear. and they feel like a club like them should really be back in the Premier League. They haven't been in the Premier League since 1999. After we've been to Nottingham Forest, you check that vlog from a couple of seasons ago in our playlists, and you feel the aura of around the city ground. You're like, yeah, big club. This is a big club to go to, Nottingham Forest, yeah. But lately, it just seems to it seems to be a stink around the place, and no one seems to know what to do about it.
It was quite sad, wasn't it? Because I mean, I was going to mention that when we went there a couple of years ago, it's not just the fact that the atmosphere was great, the fans were still bouncing. It was the fact that you just felt it when you got there, didn't you? This is a big club. This is a team that should be fighting at the top. And I know football's not played on reputation, but there is so much potential and infrastructure there. It's a beautiful stadium. They've got such a vociferous and big fan base. And you just feel that with the right manager, supported by the right ownership, we could see a real rise with a club like Nottingham Forest. And my problem is that just off the pitch, the support isn't there. I think there's more wrong than a manager. I don't think at the end of the day, with hindsight, maybe Chris Hughton wasn't quite the right fit, but I don't think he can be entirely blamed for this. It'll be interesting to see how Steven Reid does in the interim, but I think there needs to be changes at boardroom level as well. The chairman seems to make some odd, bizarre statements, and the owners, obviously at this club and at other clubs abroad, have had pretty poor managerial records in many a recent year.
Let's get on to Steven Reid. He takes interim charge of the game on Saturday against Huddersfield. What are you expecting from Steven Reid?
I don't really know. I think it's probably just a tick-over job at the moment. I think Nottingham Forest fans will not be happy if it's not a established manager that comes in next. So I don't think he's got a chance at getting it permanently. But I think it's going to be very important that he keeps a solid defensive base, because Forest haven't been woeful at the back, albeit the last couple of games you've probably seen the beginning of the end and they've dropped off a little. But going forward, he's got to find a way to make them more effective in the short term, whether that is shoving two up front in Taylor, Graben, whoever it might be, even Joe Lolly up alongside someone for pace, and just going long, playing for set pieces. It's becoming a results business for Forest now. It can't worry about the style of football and how many defensive midfielders are playing, how solid are we having to be at the back, how little possession are we having. Forest are in big trouble. They have to get results. They might be aided by the fact that their bitter rivals look like they might be getting a points deduction anytime soon, but still, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think for Steven Reid, it will be more direct. I think the fans will get immediately behind him if he puts two up front, regardless of the situation. And maybe just try and take advantage of set pieces, because they haven't got that lightning pace through the team anymore.
And let's look to the future, who we think might be the next man in charge of Nottingham Forest. There's a few names already been put out there. Chris Wilder seems to be an early contender favourite, because obviously what he done with Sheffield United. Other names, Alex Neil, obviously got that championship experience with Norwich and obviously recently with Preston. John Terry, for a new guy, obviously was assistant manager to Dean Smith. Are you say they're the top three, or would you say maybe a former Nottingham Forest legend in Roy Keane or a Chris Cohen, for example, because he's obviously a coach at Luton Town, or Nathan Jones, because Nathan Jones seems to be linked with every championship club in the last 2-3 years. So do you see them going for another experienced man like Chris Hughton was, or do you think they might go for someone completely different, someone new?
I don't know. As much as I'd like to possibly see it, I don't think they can go for a new up-and-coming coach at the moment, because it needs someone who can get an instant turnaround and win the fans over quickly. I think the only one that you haven't mentioned that's probably in contention is Steve Cooper. It's quite weird, actually, because I've got the odds up on the screen as we've been recording this. We're about 9 minutes in. And when we started it, Chris Wilder was odds on and Steve Cooper third favourite. Steve Cooper's now odds on and Chris Wilder second favourite. So I don't think anyone knows in truth. And it's probably unusual for Forest that we've got 2 hours past to sack him without an appointment, because that's normally instantly ready. There's been a lot of stuff coming out behind the scenes suggesting that they already had a short list and those 4 were already on it. But I don't know which one's going to be appropriate, Craig. I don't think it'll be John Terry. I'm going to say he'll rule himself out, as it's not the right job for him. And I don't think they're going to go for an inexperienced manager. So I'm ruling him out. I think it's between Wilder, Cooper and Neil. Neil's only being linked because he was there last night watching the game. I don't know if he would be otherwise. I don't think it matters out the other two. I think Steve Cooper is the man who might get the fan on side because he plays good football. He's rebuilt a Swansea side from an ageing team on a high wage, coming down from the Premier League and getting stuck. And he built them with a young team of hungry players from the lower leagues and really developed them well, got them in the playoffs. So he could be the right solution, but you probably would have said the same about Chris Hughton. So I think Chris Wilder is the man who seems to be the favourite. He's did a fantastic job at Sheffield United, but he supported them, and that gives you an extra 10% of edge. He's done a good job wherever he's gone. We've interviewed players on here that have talked about his man management at all levels. So I don't think it would be a bad appointment if either of those took charge. I actually think Alex Neil would be a good appointment too, but I would rule John Terry out. But who do you think it's going to be, Craig? Sorry to turn the table.
Oh, thanks, mate. I don't want Chris Hughton to go. Chris Hughton. I don't want Chris Wilder to go to Forest. I really don't. Obviously he had problems with the owner at Sheffield United when it got really sad that transfer recruitment wasn't there. Start of last season in the Premier League, and it clearly showed because they were bottom pretty much the whole season, and then he went. Alex Neil for me is the cheap option, and it makes more sense for Alex Neil to go there rather than Steve Cooper. I think, as much as I'm not a fan of Alex Neil, I think it will be him.
He has been promoted, hasn't he, from Championship?
Has been promoted. It has been promoted with Norwich, but I think it suits him more at Forest to rebuild something than it probably would be for Steve Cooper, because I think Steve Cooper could do it. I think if Steve Cooper gets another job, it might be a lower Premier League side that's struggling near the bottom, or a Championship manager resigned because he's been moved to a Premier League club and he's taken over from there. That's my opinion. John Terry's not used to a relegation battle. The same with Wayne Rooney struggled at Derby. They're not used to relegation battles. So it's harder to get the mind of, okay, I've got the experience of trying to keep the club up. So I don't think John Terry will suit for Nottingham Forest. So I'm going to go for Alex Neil.
That means I've got to pick now, doesn't it?
Yes, please pick.
I completely agree with you on John Terry. Alex Neil, I think it's a good appointment still because he's taken them up. And that Norwich side he took over when they were in a little bit of disarray in mid-table, and he led them up the league. But again, with Alex Neil and Steve Cooper, particularly the way it finished for him at Swansea, have they got, I guess, that reputation, that outward character to go into a boardroom and say, no, this is what you're going to do. We need to overhaul the squad. I think Chris Wilder's the only one who's got that, but he will produce fireworks in the meantime. So it's a risk for the board. But I think of the four, he's probably the most likely, and I think he's probably the most suited. I still wouldn't be hugely shocked, Craig, if it's not one of the four and we just get a random contender out of nowhere. But of the four that are mainly there at the moment, as much as Steve Cooper seems to have the lowest odds most of the time, I'm going to go for Chris Wilder.
Two excellent candidates, but there only are choices. Give us your choice in the comment section. Who do you think will be the next Nottingham Forest head coach? And give us your thoughts on how Chris Hughton was and how you think Nottingham Forest have been for the last year or so. Why don't I give this video a like, subscribe to the Honest Football Podcast, and you can follow us on Twitter at Honest Football 3. And we'll see you next time.